So yeah, welcome to our power lunch. If this is your first time joining, I'm sorry that was your first experience. But welcome at the same time.
And if you're tuning in from YouTube, welcome, because this is the
Yes,
first time we're live on YouTube.
yes, and again, I apologize. If this is not your first time, I'm sure you're laughing at the other end of this at how ridiculous we are sometimes, and that's okay.
Listen,
I
the most important thing is that we're here.
We're here. We're here.
I
I
think.
hope you all had a great long weekend. I know in the Ottawa area, have apparently summer arrived this weekend.
Yeah,
Um,
finally, right at the end
yeah,
of summer.
yeah. It took all summer for summer to arrive, but it is here. It is freaking hot today. It
Mm-hmm.
was freaking hot yesterday, and it's supposed to be the same tomorrow. So, but that's kind of the cool part about, I guess, the entrepreneurial life and this whole like design your life thing is that, we kept our paddle boards blown up because we might go out on the water today, we might go out tomorrow, um, because we can rearrange our schedule to
Yeah.
allow ourselves to do that.
Yeah.
So, and we have
Didn't really have to
this.
book it off. Just
Yeah.
had to block it off in the calendar.
Yeah, and we have this to thank, right? Like, we tell a lot of people that we work harder than we ever did when we were in our full-time jobs. But the trade-off of that is, yeah, we can book off our schedule if summer decides to arrive September 3rd or whatever day it was that it got nice. And it allows us to have that flexibility to go out and enjoy those days, even,
Yeah.
even when we don't really plan ahead to. We don't have to like call in sick or something or book the days off. But anyways, kind of cool.
Yeah. And we couldn't have done it without partnerships.
Partnerships, real estate, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
It's a big week.
It is a big week.
It's a big week for us. It's funny because we've been so busy since January, and Jeff and I we have a meeting at the beginning of our, we'll call it work week. So we do like a beginning of the work week meeting, and then we have smaller meetings every morning to go over, what are the goals for the week? What are the goals for today? What do we need to get done? Who's doing what? Just to make sure that we're not overlapping tasks or things aren't being forgotten or whatever.
Well, we started out in this business together, overlapping a lot of tasks. We were doing a lot of the same things. We kind of fell into our roles, what we're good at. And yeah, it's nice now that we have those meetings in the morning to talk about who's doing what. And that way we know that we're being productive.
Yeah. So we sat down to have that meeting this morning, and our list has been like super long every week. And it was funny this morning. I was like, our list is short this week. Like it felt weird. I was like, we're missing something. There's got to be something we're missing.
Yep.
But it's because the two projects that we've been, busting our butts for the last almost year, they're not coming to an end, but they're like, I don't know, wrapping up in a way, I guess. Like, they're wrapping up. They're kind of not on autopilot, but like things are moving along more without us now. And it's a weird feeling.
It is
I
weird.
feel like we're missing something.
Yeah, it definitely feels like we're missing something.
But
for sure.
Yeah, so this week, and I'm going to knock on wood because I feel like you should never say this kind of stuff, but this week we're closing on the 24 unit that we've been working for.
We're scheduled to close.
We're scheduled to close
tomorrow.
Scheduled to close tomorrow. We don't ever want to say anything else. But yeah, so that's a big deal. We've been working on that one since
January.
Yeah, since January. Closing on a $6 million deal is, after that much work, is like crazy. But yeah, obviously that's taken off a lot of stress that we're finally like heading to the finish line.
We see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, and obviously the work doesn't end there. There's like the stabilization and the moving everything over. But yeah, so it's kind of coming to closure, I guess. And then the conversions we're doing are also, one of them's done and tenanted, and the other one is close to being done and close to being tenanted. So it's crazy.
I think the thing is right now we're there's not much more that we need to do until it closes, and then once it closes, then I think our task items are going to start to pick up a little bit, obviously with the stabilization of it, the management of the asset, management of the property. management of the people.
So yeah, it's a big week. It's a warm week.
It's very warm.
Kind of the start of a new season. September always feels like it's the start of like a new season.
That's true.
So
back to school.
Yeah, back to school. Back to like, I don't know.
People are back at it.
Yeah, we were all. I feel like we didn't stop being at it, but
no,
most people. But yeah. Anyways, so yeah, that's what we're up to. That's what we're doing.
Onto the topic of today.
Yeah. So today, if you joined us last week, you already know what our topic is this week because it's a continuation of our topic from last week.
Yeah, we kind of ran out of time last week talking about one part of partnerships. Yes. And we will continue that conversation today.
So the big focus for today's discussion is more around like the active passive partnership, what that partnership looks like, what that relationship looks like, and
who's responsible for what are the expectations, what makes a good active, what makes a good passive partner.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, in most business, that's really important. A lot of businesses have passive investors, passive money partners. But obviously it's super important in the real estate world because and I think this is something that's happening more often now because we saw a generation where, and we're seeing this now because they're actually selling a lot of their properties, where people, it was like your mom and pop investors that like, you know, they bought the property with their own money because they could buy a 6 unit, a 12 unit, a 24 unit with, you know, the money you had saved up in your bank account. And they didn't really do the whole partnership thing. They just bought it, mom and pop operators. And we're actually seeing a lot of them selling their properties now.
Yeah. So this would have been, they bought it like in the 80s kind of thing. Yeah. And now they're ready to retire. They're ready to give up that property. It has gone up in value significantly. So they have their little nest egg. And to buy it today is a lot more difficult for somebody to do by themselves, for a mom and pop to just step in and buy that type of an asset. So there's a lot of partnerships that are being built in order to basically take these assets down.
Yeah. And I think this has been a bit of a transition from, I mean, we weren't investing in the 70s and 80s. So I can't say for sure, but from what I understand, this is a transition where we're seeing a lot more partnerships in the real estate world, less people just going out and purchasing their own properties and they are the sole owner. A lot of it's happening through partnerships, and a lot of it, like Jeff said, has to do with the affordability piece because, you know, for a 24 unit, like I just said, it's a $6 million deal. You need a good chunk of change to be able to take that down on your own. So,
well, and then not only that, but affordability and scalability, right?
Yes.
To be able to take down more than one. Let's say you can take that down. You have the $2 million or whatever you need to buy that asset. Okay, now how are you going to buy your next one, right?
Yeah.
Because now maybe you're tapped out on owning the one. So that's where partnerships can really come in to allow you to scale and allow you to kind of break through that affordability barrier.
Yeah, and it makes it a lot more accessible too. You don't have to be someone who, you know, has really high income or has been an extraordinary saver if you're not a high income earner to be able to purchase these properties, because now partnerships are becoming kind of the norm. So you have access to being able to purchase these types of properties without needing to be the person with a whole bunch of money or the person with the high income or, the rich dude that can afford the real estate, right? Like you don't have to be that. It's far more accessible, and that's because of these partnerships. Really, you just need knowledge to be able to do it. And I think that's the cool part, and that's what's made it so much more accessible, that you don't need to be all the parts of the deal.
Knowledge and determination and drive. You need a few things.
Yeah. Yeah.
To make
you need
it
to
happen.
be a little gritty. You need to be okay with working on the same deal for 8 months and not owning all of it at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what that partnership looks like, because the way that we function a lot now, this is actually a little bit different than the way we used to function when we got into the multifamily space, is we focus a lot on partnerships. we were focusing a lot before on more on the private lending space. And I think this is kind of what people think of when they think of investing is the private lending space.
Majority, it seems, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the reasoning is, but a lot of people don't realize that you can actually own a piece of the asset if you invest passively. You don't need to do it from the private lending space where you don't own anything at the end.
Yeah, I feel like when you think about, like, when people are first learning about maybe saving money and earning on their money, they think about interest.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you lend out money and then you earn an interest rate, that's private lending. But we get this question a lot when we're talking about partnerships too. It's like, okay, if I lend you $200,000, what's my interest rate?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's ownership in the building
in
this case, so it's a little bit different.
Two things right away, right? Like if I lend you this money,
yeah,
it's like that's your first step back. Is like you're not lending this money to us. You're actually, like, think of it as purchasing a piece of the property, right? Like you're owning a piece of it with us. So that's one of the first steps that people have to take back, that we're like, no, this isn't like you're not lending money. You're not doing that kind of that private lending space. And then I guess the second step back is, what's my return? Yeah.
Or what's my interest rate?
What's my interest rate? Yeah. Like, well, there isn't one. You own a piece of the property and you're going to make a portion of whatever the property makes based on, whatever the deal is, whatever has been decided on your ownership.
Yeah. So you end up getting a return on that, but that's based on several factors, which I believe we've discussed in a previous. If we haven't, then
I think we have. We definitely have. Yeah, it was one of our previous. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about how those returns happen when you are investing for equity or investing for ownership, I can't remember what the video is called, but it's up on YouTube, and it goes over the different income streams and
profit centers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's search profit centers for Opinicon Investments, and you'll find our a previous power lunch that we had done talking about what those are and kind of how those returns are made up. Mm-hmm. Subscribe to our YouTube while you're there. So you'll get notified when we go live, and when we're going live on YouTube, you'll be notified.
Yep. And the interesting part about being, passive in that way and not doing it from a private lending perspective is you're not relying on, that one return, like that one, I guess, whatever you've subscribed to, that one income stream, but it's not like that one agreed upon interest rate.
Yes.
Right? Like you're getting return from, and this depends on the partnership that you've agreed on and whatever you've signed on. Mm-hmm. But you get money from cash flow, you get money from the mortgage pay down, you get money from passive appreciation, from active appreciation. So you're actually relying on multiple streams of income that way, which, I mean, a lot of people talk about how important that is, having multiple streams of income. And that way you have it on your one investment, which is pretty cool. So anyways, active and passive partnerships.
When it comes to equity ownership, we're talking specifically around partnerships, like equity partnerships, not partnerships with like private lending or anything like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So really two sides of it, I guess. There's the active side and the passive side.
What does that mean?
Yeah. What does that mean? So I guess what makes a good active partner?
Well, what is an active partner?
An active partner, okay, is somebody that does just throwing questions back at me. They put the time into it. They put the effort and the energy. They have the knowledge, as you were talking about before. They have the systems. They have the people. They're basically the conductor of all of this. Mm-hmm. And then a passive partner is typically somebody that just brings one asset to the table, and that's it. So that could be either money or credit.
Yeah.
Credit is a little bit more active because usually there's some paperwork to sign that's outside of just like the joint venture agreement or shareholder agreement or whatever it is, whatever type of agreement you have, GPLP. There's mortgage signing and stuff like that because that's typically what they're there for. But yeah, that's it. It's really just the passive side of it is fairly simple. There's not much to it from a roles perspective because
Hmm.
they're not doing a whole lot aside from providing that capital.
Yeah, I think to me the biggest difference is one, you're trading time. So obviously your active side, that's more where you're trading time. So that's the time to learn how to put a good deal together. You're trading your time to actually find the deal, to create the partnerships, to create the systems, to like find the good deal, underwrite the good deal, negotiate the good deal. And notice like deal, good deal. That's important. Not just like
Create the
finding,
deal.
yeah, creating a deal. It's not just finding like a property. It's finding the right property, finding the right deal. And it's a lot harder than I think a lot of people understand is finding a good, solid or creating a good, solid deal because, they're not just hanging out on MLS necessarily. So
They're
it's a lot
not.
of not typically, no. Um, Typically, they've gone through a couple of eyes before they make it to MLS. So at that point, you have to get a little bit creative to make them work.
Yeah, and then when they're on MLS, it's the widest view possible.
Yes. So you're competing at that point, which makes it a little bit more tricky.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're really as an active partner, you're trading your time and your knowledge, but it took time to get that knowledge. So in the end, you're trading your time to be able to get into that investment, which is fine because obviously time is super important. I talk about this all the time, but it's the one non-renewable resource really that you have, like truly, truly non-renewable. You can't like we can't get back the last 17 minutes that we spent rambling on about.
And neither can
Neither
you, but
can
thank you for being here.
We appreciate it. But yeah, like you can't get that back. You really can't get time back. Once it's spent, that's it. So time is super important. But if you're not somebody, if you're just starting out, maybe you haven't built a ton of wealth, you don't have a bunch of income that you can put towards doing an investment, because guess what, it takes time to also make that income. So either way, basically you're kind of spending your time on it. But it's somewhere to start, right? At least being able, yes, to trade your most valuable asset, but at least you can trade that now to be a part owner of real estate.
I mean, that's what the average human does anyways. They're trading time for money, right? You're going to work 9 to 5 and you're getting paid a salary to do that. So you're trading your time for money.
Yeah. So to me, that's really like anything you're doing actively, you're trading your time to do whatever it is for return. And in this case, you're trading your time for a piece of ownership in the property. So that is a big deal. And don't undervalue your time because it is very, very important. So to me, that's your active side. And obviously your passive side, you're reducing your time component to minimal or zero, but you're trading typically funds, money. Like Jeff said, your credit. So you're trading your qualifiability. Bankability. I like qualifiability. I think I just made that word up. Your ability to qualify for whatever deal it is that you're looking for. Maybe that's what you're trading to own a piece of the property. But really, again, that's not as time intensive. You still do need to do some paperwork, but it's a lot less time intensive, which brings it more onto the passive side of that scale. So that's kind of what your two partnership pieces really look like. And I think it's really important to define what those roles are, because there is sometimes
as early as possible in the partnership.
And we talk about that in the live we did last week. So again, if you didn't see that, go back, watch the live from last week, also on partnerships. We talk a lot about the importance of defining roles before you get too far into your partnership, ideally as early on as possible. But again, it's super important to define what those things look like and to know how to be a good active and a good passive partner. Because being an active partner, it's not enough just to know, not to have just to have the knowledge and the time. You also have to be a decent person to your passive investors, or they're not going to want to do it again with you.
Especially if you're looking for that scalability aspect of it.
So you want to make sure you're a good active partner. And then same on the passive side, right? Like you want to make sure that you're falling within your passive role in a good way, Because just because you have money doesn't necessarily mean that the active partner is going to want to invest with you again if you're not a good passive partner. So it's important to know the basics. I mean, obviously every deal is a little bit different, but the basics of what makes a good active partner and what makes a good passive partner.
Mm-hmm.
So what does make a good, want to start with active or passive?
Active will take the longest, I think, to talk about.
So do you want to end
we can start
with
with
that?
no, we can start with let's start with active,
Okay.
and then we'll get to passive.
Okay. Yeah, we'll try not to make it too in depth, but
yeah,
we'll see what happens. So, what does make a good active partner?
Well, I mean, simply put, being able to fulfill your roles and responsibilities, right? And those can be lengthy,
Extensive.
depending on if you are doing it as kind of an active partner alone, or if you have shared role responsibility with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, you're putting your time into it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really just being able to fulfill. So I guess the real question is, what are those roles and responsibilities then, right?
Well, I think we can even use we have a very active role in the deal that we're closing this week. So I think we can go through and kind of talk about what did we do? Because those are basically what the roles are for an active investor.
What have we been
doing? Right? Because I think that's a big part of, like, we basically went through the roles of what I hope we were good active partners. I think we were good active partners.
Yeah, we went through the whole process.
Yeah. So
at least up until the purchase, right?
Yeah. And I think a big part of it, again, and I think this is something that a lot of people, going back to the timepiece, but a lot of people want to be active investors, or they think they want to be an active investor, but they don't realize how much time it actually takes. Like, the big thing to remember is Jeff and I do this full time. So we were full time, two of us working on this project.
More than 9 to 5. We were more like 9 to 9.
Yeah. To be fair, we were working on a couple of projects simultaneously, but it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of work to be an active investor, and it's a lot of work to be an active investor, not just within the deal that you're doing, but everything around the deal that you're doing and everything to set yourself up for the deal that you're doing. So, I mean, I think the first part, the big part about being an active investor is you got to know what you're doing. And you have to educate yourself. I say to a lot of people when they want to become an active investor, I talk to them about getting some form of education. And I'm not going to say that, we've been educated, and I'd say there's no formal real estate investing education, but in a more like
it's pretty formal though.
It's
way. Very structured.
Yes. You don't necessarily have to do that, but you need like a mentor, or you need to put some time in to know what you're doing.
Yeah. Mentor is a really good way to do it, because then you have somebody that's kind of holding your hand through the process. They're guiding you the right direction. You have somebody to bounce ideas off of and to bounce deals off of, to see, like, is this actually a good deal? Am I missing something? Where are the gaps that I currently have?
Yeah. So you need to be willing to invest in yourself. And that oftentimes, I know we talked about not needing money, but there is a financial component to that often.
There should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, that's a whole other rant.
That's a belief. I guess that's an opinion. We'll call it an opinion that we have. But it does often take some financial contribution in your own education. But it's the same way as, I come from a medical background, and I talk to a lot of people, like, especially from the medical background, like, would you go and treat a patient without having your, if you're a nurse 4 years, if you're a doctor, like 11 years often, would you go and treat a patient without having paid for that education? I
did when I was a kid.
Okay, but I don't know what
taking the funny bone out was the hardest one, I think.
Oh, did it buzz you if you didn't do it properly? I think it's a little bit
Operation
different.
Was a good game.
I think it's a little different. But yeah, like, would you do those things without paying for education? No, that's insane. Like, would a surgeon just decide or they're not even a surgeon at that point because they haven't gone to school, but would someone just decide that they're gonna, other than the game operation when they're young, would they just operate on somebody because they think they can do it and they want to be able to do it? No, of course not. That's insane. They're gonna go to school and they're gonna learn how to do it. Could that student afford schooling? at that point? Can a lot of students afford schooling?
No, that's why they have loans.
Yeah. They do something to get them through that schooling. So they're willing to make that investment because they know what's on the other end is going to be proper education and the proper ability to do these things. And they're going to be able, with that knowledge, to pay back that debt.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with real estate. And just because you can't go to university or college for it, it doesn't matter. You still have to make that investment to learn what you're doing. Because, and I say, like, if you reverse it, if you're a passive investor, would you invest in someone that's not even willing to invest in themselves?
That's a great question.
If you were a patient, would you be willing to accept surgery? Like, I know it's your, healthcare is covered in Canada, but think about like in the States. Would you accept like someone who's going to do cheaper surgery on you because they're cheaper because they didn't go to school?
They didn't go to medical school.
No, that's insane. Like, that's an insane thought. So why would a passive investor invest with you if you haven't even invested in yourself yet? So super important to think about, but that all comes back to taking the time and a little bit of financial contribution to invest in yourself. And I think that's a really important place to start as an active investor. So yeah, that was a bit of a rant. I'm tired now.
That was.
That was a lot. Sorry.
Jeepers.
I know, that was a lot. So
back to being an active
time. So time is your first one, but there's like a setup time, I think, is what a lot of people forget about.
Preparation and really gaining that knowledge, right? So we already talked about the fact that you need the knowledge, but where do you get the knowledge? Dakota's rant, right?
My rant.
That's where you get the
Don't do
knowledge.
surgery if you haven't gone to school. So not the time in the deal necessarily. And I think this is something that a lot of people forget about, is that there's time before the deal happens. And maybe we'll talk about this again when we get to the passive investor side, but it's something that a lot of people forget about, that there's like a setup period. There's an education period. And then beyond that education period, there's also the finding the team period.
Building your team, building your systems, finding a deal.
Learning about what a good deal is, and doing a ton, like underwriting hundreds of deals potentially, and having deals under contract and having them not work out, and interviewing people and going through different people to have on your power team. Like, this all takes a lot of time to have the right people in place. Like, it doesn't have to, I guess. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. But if it doesn't, you probably don't have the best team in place, and you probably don't have the best systems and finding the best deals, because you haven't put that time into making sure that things are well set up.
Yeah, or you haven't gone through something that maybe now you need to change somebody on your team because there wasn't enough of a build up to or relationship built to have that person on your team.
Yeah. So a big part of being an active investor is doing your education, building up your power team. So having the people around you to make sure that you're well set up. So those are like your investor focused, super important. You're investor focused. Realtors, your investor focused mortgage brokers, lawyers, insurance brokers, accountants. I could keep going. Contractors, like your power team. And there are a ton of these people in the world. Like, there's a ton of mortgage brokers, a ton of accountants, a ton of lawyers. But you need to find the right people for what you're doing within real estate.
Investor focused, has experience in the type of asset class you're going after. Not just, okay, it's an investor focused realtor who does a lot of residential. Okay, that doesn't really help me when it comes to buying an apartment building. Yeah. Right? Or even in
residential being like
for or
you're
under.
like two to
let's say most realtors are dealing with single family homes.
Yeah.
They're not dealing with investors. And even still, most investor focused realtors are dealing with single family homes.
Yeah. So building your power team, that's a huge part of like your pre-work before you even gotten into the deal. And then you have to network. You have to network like crazy, and not just to find your power team, but to find, maybe your mentors, maybe people that you want to be inspired by, people that are going to help you think a little bit differently. And then also your investors, right? Like, you have to build the people that, like, develop those relationships with people that are interested in being a passive investor with you. And that's not something that happens in one conversation. Typically, that's not something that happens overnight. It can get a little bit easier the more of the track record that you have. But from the beginning, it's really, really tough. So you have to build a lot of relationships, and that takes a ton of time. Because you want to make sure that you're bringing the right people onto your deals, and you need to find those people somewhere. They don't just typically don't just pop out of nowhere. You have to go and find them.
And if you're looking at a deal from maybe having multiple passive investors on this deal, then that's really important as well. Just being able to build and actually have enough investors that the deal can actually happen, right? So just having the one investor may not make that deal happen. So you need to have those relationships.
Yeah. And so again, this is all before you even hit the deal. And things like this, like being on social media, being out there with what you're doing, often
doing the walkthroughs and sharing the journey that you're on, really.
Yeah. And attracting people to what you're doing. That all takes time. So you have all of that even before you found the deal. So you're underwriting like crazy, you're networking like crazy, you're building your team, you're learning how to build a better deal, you're getting stuff under contract, it's not working, it's, you have to walk away. And then you find the deal.
Now, oh my God, finally we're at the deal. Now we
found the deal. So obviously there's a lot of buildup, and there's a lot of the things that people don't see. This is like a lot of what it is to be an active investor is behind the scenes. But this is like super behind the scenes because you don't even have the deal at this point. Right?
Yes.
So now we have the deal. Now what do you do as an active investor with the deal?
Well, do we have the deal? No, you have to find the deal. Right?
I thought we found the deal.
Well, I mean, you've built the teams, but now you have to go through multiple. So now we're talking about doing those walkthroughs. Now we're talking about talking to multiple realtors, right? You're still building, not necessarily building your team, but okay, the realtors that you've built and you've added to your team, are they bringing you good deals? Have you found a good deal? We can talk about what makes a good deal in a different topic.
Yeah, that's not for today.
No, definitely not for today. I feel like we need to power through the rest of this. We're over 30 minutes here, but
that's okay.
So finding the deal, negotiating, right? Having good negotiation skills to be able to make sure that the deal you have is actually good. Underwriting, making sure that all of the numbers line up. Once you get that, like submitting offers, you're submitting offers like crazy, but okay, we found the deal at this point. We've submitted all of our offers. We've been rejected. We've gone back to the table, renegotiated. We have the deal. We've underwritten it already. Now it's due diligence time. So they've given you a pro forma, essentially. You would have got this deal under contract based off of the numbers that the seller gives you, that the realtor gives you. But now you need to verify that those numbers are accurate. So you're going to request the deliverables from the sellers deliverables, which are usually at least 12 months of bills, the leases that are in place, all expenses, essentially. And you're going to go through those with a fine tooth comb.
We have due diligence, actually. We're referencing back to a lot of videos we've done already, but
it all intertwines.
We do a full due diligence talk in a different video. So if you're interested in like the in-depth version of what due diligence looks like, again, that's another one of our videos on YouTube.
Okay, so we won't dive into that at all. At this point, we'll just say we need to do the due diligence. Yeah. So that is a lengthy piece. Meanwhile, you are creating an investor package, right? You want to be able to, if you're looking to do partnerships, now you need to go and find some partners if you don't have people that are already lined up to invest in whatever deal you may have.
Yeah. So now you're back, right? You're back to the networking piece. Hopefully you found some people that would be interested in getting involved in what you're doing. But now you have to go back and, actually talk to them about it and see if this deal is a good fit for them. Would they be interested in coming on board with you? So now you're having a lot of different conversations with people who are potential partners for you.
Okay. And those people do come on board, let's say, right? You found your investors. I had a train of thought. Now I lost it.
I have my investors.
Stuff changes.
Now you're going back and communicating with
something
them.
changes in the deal, and you need to make sure that you are being open and communicating with all those investors to make sure that everybody that came on board for the deal at this period of time is still on board for the deal after those changes, whatever has happened.
Yeah.
Maybe you got an insurance quote back, or you got a environmental study back, and something changed, or your inspection came back, and all the deal's a little bit different now.
Yeah.
Because there's this CapEx that was missed or something.
Yeah. So you're doing your due diligence, you're communicating with your investors, even if they're on board, you're continuing to communicate with your investors. You might be going back to renegotiate the deal. You're making sure everything's moving forward with the deal. If there's any sort of setbacks, you need to sometimes get creative, pivot, go in a slightly different direction, make some adjustments. So, it is a lot of work when you have the deal under contract, but really, I feel like a lot of the deal happens before you even have the deal, or a lot of the work happens before you even have the deal. But
a lot does happen, but a lot happens after you get the deal as well, because now you're dealing with all of the team members that you've brought in, right? That you found previous.
Yeah.
Now you're getting your insurance quote, you're getting your appraisal done, you're figuring out the lending. Like, are you getting a mortgage for this, and what does that look like? What product are you going with?
How are you structuring the deal? What kind of deal structure are you going to be using? You're talking to your lawyers about that.
Talking to your lawyer a lot throughout the process to determine the best deal structure for this, and what that looks like.
Yeah. So a ton of work happening while just like in the due diligence. So you don't even have the deal. You're not even firm typically on the deal at this point. So you're not even sure this deal is going through at this point, right? Like, you're doing all your due diligence and making sure it is in fact a good deal. Finally, you go firm. So this is where you're like, if you're putting it under a new corp, you're creating your corp, you're finalizing all your investors, making sure they're all on board. Now you've gone firm. Things lighten up a little bit at that point, but then you start thinking about, what is your stabilization process going to be? So you've hopefully thought about this a little bit before, but now you actually have to put that plan in action. So you're getting prepared for your closing with, are there units that need to be filled? How are we filling them?
So a good example of this actually is we recently had a meeting with our partners about the property management. Okay, so let's say we close next week. What are we going to do after we close? We need to have an action plan, and what's going to happen from a property management perspective, communicating with the tenants. Is there going to be a letter that gets sent out to the existing tenants? All that stuff, right? So this is now
transferring over where rent's going.
Yeah, transferring over, like making sure that the rent starts to come to the right place after closing.
Bills.
Setting up all the bills, all the stabilization stuff. You start to plan for that before you close. You don't want to close and then be like, okay, now we stabilize and let's start talking about that.
Especially if you have renos. Like, if you're closing, like for us, we were closing on a project that it's turnkey, basically. So there's not a ton of like renovations that need to happen. But if you're closing on something that needs a big renovation, like our conversions, you're getting that lined up before closing.
Yeah, so a good example actually is our conversions. So we started the permit process before we closed on the properties. We had a designer out there. We used one of our site visits that we had agreed on in our APS to go on site with our designer so that they could map out the unit and basically be able to come up with a design that we could submit for permits before we even closed on this.
Mm-hmm. So you're getting things ready for closing at that point, whether it's turnkey or if it's a big reno. You're actually doing a ton of work right now. Then obviously you go through the closing, the deal is now yours, but the work doesn't stop there as an active partner, right? Like, you're still, if there's a big reno, you might be managing that reno. If there's stabilization that's happening, you're managing that. And moving forward, even if there isn't a big renovation project or anything like that, you're making sure the deal is still financially making sense as you go along. Are there areas that you can make improvements? Are there expenses that maybe you need to renegotiate because, they've gone up, or maybe you realize that they can be lower? You're renegotiating those things. You're taking care of doing things like rent increases, and just making sure the building is still making sense and is still optimized. Because a lot of the times, if the active investor ignores a building, that's where things start to fall apart and buildings aren't as productive as they could be. And as an active investor, you need to stay on that. You need to make sure that that's still a good investment, that you're taking care of your asset, because that's no longer just you, it's also your partners.
Yeah. So simply put, you are doing operations,
Yeah.
right? You are managing the asset, potentially managing the property itself, like property management being different, or managing the property manager. You're bringing your experience,
Your
and
creativity.
expertise, your knowledge, everything that you had on Dakota's rent for pre deal, I guess. And then you're taking on more of the liability in this aspect as well. And we can talk about that maybe with if a lawyer wants to come on to one of these with us, then we can talk about kind of what liability looks like from a passive investor versus an active investor.
And this also depends on your structure.
Yes.
As well.
So often in bigger deals, especially, a lot of the liability that the passive investor takes on is really around their invested capital, not so much from a legal perspective if there's a slip and fall or something like that. Typically that's either on the active side or on the property management side, either way.
Yeah. So obviously as an active investor, there's a ton of work that you're doing. So and this is where I said at the beginning, it's really important to realize how big of a deal it is to be an active investor and to not, belittle how much work it really is. I see a lot of people, whether they're new passive investors or new active investors, they can't comprehend why someone doesn't have to put money into a deal to own a piece of it. And
that's not what this whole power lunch is about. This is really just about the differences.
Yeah.
But
it is something that I do, yeah. I see often, is that people, they can't wrap their head around the fact that this active investor who, hasn't put any money into the deal, so why is the split the way it is? And a lot of active investors are like, oh yeah, like I don't have any money to put in the deal. Like I don't have any value to add to this deal. You're adding a ton to the deal as an active investor. If the deal
wouldn't happen without you.
Yeah. So don't belittle what you're doing, because your time is super valuable.
There's a really good book, actually. Love him or hate him, Stefan Arnio wrote a really good book called Money People Deal.
Yeah.
Solid book to describe kind of the differences and I guess 3 pillars that create a good deal.
Yeah.
Or create a partnership.
Yeah. And the last kind of thing that I'll say about an active investor, I don't know if you have more to say, is the communication and kind of the grit behind being an active investor. Because you have to be able to communicate with your team really, really well.
Transparency is critical.
So you have to realize that if things aren't going, you have to make sure that if you're making, be very careful if you're making any promises. If you're just saying things to get people to subscribe to your deal, remember that you have to live up to that now.
Especially if you want to scale.
Yeah.
And you want somebody to reinvest with you.
Yeah. So be very careful if you're making any promises. I am always very cautious using a promise or a guarantee, that type of wording, because things happen. Real estate, yes, it's a tried and true type of investment. And if you know what you're doing, typically it's a pretty stable way to invest, but nothing's ever guaranteed in investing. Nothing's ever for sure. So be very careful with the wording that you're using. And things don't go the way you plan often. It's just how real estate is. So be willing to communicate that with your investors. Don't just stick your head in the sand and hope no one ever finds out about something. Tell them when things aren't going the way that you think they should have gone, and come up with a solution for it. Maybe you might have to pivot. Things might not go exactly the way that you had planned, but if you're open and communicate and you have a way of pivoting, which is where the knowledge comes back in that you should have gained before you got into this deal, you might have to pivot. So you just have to have those conversations with your investors. And typically, if you're open and you come with a good second plan, people will be okay with that. But you just have to make sure you're communicating those plans and what that's going to look like for the investor. And yeah, don't stick your head in the sand and hope it all goes away, because it won't.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's hard. That's a really hard thing to be open to doing as an active investor. And I think it's something a lot of people don't realize when they get into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my last thought on
Active.
and that's what makes a good active investor. So that's a big piece of it, is having the knowledge, like having the knowledge and the ability and the time. The time's really important. But just also being really transparent. And that's what brings an active investor to like a good active investor, is that creativity and that transparency.
Nice. Passive.
Passive.
Not
Less
not
ranting on passive.
Not as much to say with passive. Typically just bringing the capital or the qualification, whatever it is that your role is. You can have some influence on decision making, but ultimately knowing that the final decision lies with the active investor. The active investor typically has that as a responsibility, as being that final decision maker, because they're the ones that are bringing the knowledge, and they're the ones that are putting it all together and doing all of that legwork. They're analyzing multiple scenarios, hopefully, when it comes to a decision that needs to be made.
And we talked about this a little bit on the last video, but this is where trust and finding the right partners is so important, because you do have to trust your active investors a lot. We talked a little bit on the last.
Well, active investors need to trust their passive investors as well.
100%.
To say, okay, passive investors said that they would invest $200K into this deal. Are they going to pull through? Like, are they going to back out at the last minute? Now there's a scramble, or do I trust that this person actually is going to follow through with their commitment?
Yeah, and the full commitment.
So that trust, deal. The point is that trust needs to go both ways.
100%. So as far as trusting your active partner, because the active partner is the one who's really in the deal. Like, they're in the trenches. They know like the ins and outs of that deal. Hopefully, if you've invested with the right people, they know the ins and outs. So from the outside, if they're making a decision and you're not really sure about it, or it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to you, it might be because you're not in the trenches, and you just have to trust that the active investor is, doing the right thing. I think it's okay to bring up other options if there's things that you've thought of.
And that's why I said there's no decision-making power. It's really limited. It's you can have influence.
Yes.
You can give your 2 cents.
Yeah.
But ultimately just know that the active investor has the final say and maybe your partnership structure is different, but I mean,
this all comes down to what's agreed on.
Typically this is what we see.
Yeah. So having a lot of trust with your active investor, trusting that they know what they're doing, trusting that, they're in the trenches, they're going to make the best decision based on the whole picture, because you might be seeing a limited piece of the picture. And it's not because they haven't been open or transparent. It's just passive investors don't need to know every single thing about every day, about every deal, because then you're no longer passive, is what it comes down to. So, So I think a lot of trust comes in that way. And I think understanding a good piece of how much work it does take to go into a deal, because as a good passive investor, you have to be okay with, not owning the deal or not going 50-50, because the passive investor or the active investor has put a lot of time into that deal. So I think having an understanding of how much goes into putting a deal together is really valuable.
And why a deal is structured the way that it's structured.
Yeah. Of course, ask questions. Like, I like when people ask me questions, because, I'd rather all that be laid out on the table at the beginning than, they get into it, they've made their investment, and then they're unsure about something. So ask your questions, but do be understanding that, money isn't the be all end all in a deal. Putting the deal together is actually a ton of work. So I had something else too. I don't remember what it was.
I don't know.
Oh,
not in your mind.
I do know.
There you go. I helped.
Yeah. As a passive investor, you're not off the hook for knowledge. So to be a good passive investor, you don't need the as in-depth knowledge in investing, but you still need to know what a good deal looks like.
Yeah. So, especially just for yourself, to make sure that you're making a good investment in that deal. Yeah. You need to know what is a good deal, and is the deal you're investing in actually good?
Yeah. So just because you're doing things passively doesn't mean you get to know zero about investing.
Yeah.
You have to know a little bit because you want to make sure that you're doing good due diligence.
You
that
don't
you're
want to
getting into-
necessarily take over the underwriting process and redo all of the underwriting process, but you want to be able to look at maybe an investor package and question certain items on that.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that everything actually looks good, and like, oh, where did you come up with your vacancy number?
Mhm.
Right? Did you just pull that out of thin air, or is that something that you did research on?
Yeah. Or you can see, like, maybe you know an area and you know the vacancy and you'll look at it and be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense for that area.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're not off the hook. You don't get to know nothing. You still have to know a little bit.
I mean, you can do whatever you want,
Yeah,
but
that's true. I shouldn't say have
to be a good passive investor and to make good financial decisions and to make good investments, that's typically what that takes.
Yeah, you still have to have a little bit of knowledge to do things, I'd say, in a safe manner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously a little bit less about what it takes to be a passive investor because you've already put the work in to make your money. So there it is. And you can, this can be a little bit less on the heavy lifting side for you because you've,
and that's
put
the
your
idea,
time in
right?
elsewhere.
It's passive. It's supposed to be passive.
Yeah.
But there should be at least a little bit of effort put into it.
Yeah. I mean, nothing's ever
beforehand.
passive is an interesting word because I think a lot of passive investing is not entirely passive. There is going to be a little bit of paperwork here and there. You know, you have to do some due diligence.
Even finding a deal is an active
yeah
is an active role in being a passive investor.
Yeah.
Finding a good deal.
Yeah.
Like, where do I put my money? And being able to have all those meetings. So there's
Yeah.
still some active piece to it, but once you've found a good team, maybe it's easier from there. You trust that Jeff and Dakota are going to take you to the finish line every single time, then just keep reinvesting like that, right? Just as an example.
Yeah, 100%. And that comes down to the trust piece, right? Like once
and
you've built
building
that trust,
relationships,
yeah,
for sure,
makes it a little bit easier. Once you've done one with somebody, you know, you don't have to necessarily invest with a whole bunch of people. You can find your people, and those are your people, and that's fine.
Well, this one's called Power Lunch Hour,
Sorry.
I think, because
it took a while on this one.
Yeah, this took a long time, and it's a good thing we didn't try and throw this into last week's meeting.
Yeah, we would have been going all day.
Event, whatever.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think that we're done.
I think so.
Well, thanks for tuning in. Whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, this will be available on YouTube afterwards. Anybody that tunes into this and has any input, please put your comments in below the video. Drop a subscribe on this because then you'll get notified when we go live again.
And remember, I think this is important for this one, is that this is a very high kind of level overview of this. There are different types of roles in deals. Like no
structure is the same.
Yeah, you can divide active partnerships into like someone does this, someone does this, someone does this. So this is just like, you know, an overlooking view of what active and passive partnerships are. This isn't like be all end all. So
yeah.
Okay. I think that's it.
So we'll be live again next week, Tuesday, 12:30 Eastern time, on YouTube and Facebook now, apparently.
As long as it worked.
We can. I think it did. I think we're good.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in.
Until next time.
Take care.